Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that you believed they had no secrets? Imagine finding out that the man you always called your father, the very example of kindness and perfection, was hiding a dark past. A past that could completely change the way you see him. This is the story of a son who believed he had the perfect dad until he discovered who he used to be. Before we begin, I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Leave your comment, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode with 3 friends. Now, let's dive into this story. My childhood was marked by a constant sense of safety and joy. I woke up every morning to the smell of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen and the calm voice of my father calling me for breakfast. He was always there. He never seemed distant, never seemed too busy. While other kids talked about fathers who came home late from work or barely had time to play, I felt privileged. My father was different. He drove me to school, waited patiently for me at the gate, and still found the energy at night to sit on the living room floor and build wooden blocks with me. On weekends, he invented adventures. He turned the backyard into a magical forest where every tree had a story and every stone hid a treasure. I believed every word because he had a gift. He could make everything feel real. But there was something curious. As present as he was in my daily life, he never spoke about the past. When I asked what his youth had been like, he smiled and changed the subject. "Oh, nothing interesting. What matters is the now." At the time, I didn't question it. After all, the present was perfect. And to me, he was the ideal father, loving, available, always ready to show me that the world could be a safe place. The silence about who he had been before didn't bother me. On the contrary, it seemed like an irrelevant detail compared to the happiness I was living. I had no idea that one day that silence would become the greatest mystery of my life. It all began on a rainy afternoon. The house was quiet, and I decided to go up to the attic to look for some old photos for a school assignment. The smell of damp wood and dust filled the air, and every box seemed to hide small fragments of our family history. Among yellowed photo albums and forgotten toys, I found a different folder hidden at the bottom of a pile. It was heavy, and when I opened it, my heart started racing. Inside were newspaper clippings, some already faded with time. Headlines talking about investigations, mysterious disappearances, and a name I knew very well, my father's. For a few seconds, I was frozen. The printed words seemed to scream. Man wanted for involvement in mysterious case. Enigmatic figure linked to clandestine operations. I couldn't believe it. The man who had always been my safe harbor appeared there as part of a dark story. I ran down the stairs with the clippings in my hands. I found my father in the living room and, unable to contain my anxiety, laid the papers in front of him. "What is this? Why is your name here?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at the newspapers in silence. For long seconds, he didn't say anything. His eyes seemed distant, as if he were reliving something he had been trying to forget. Finally, he took a deep breath and answered, "These things are not what they seem. One day, I'll explain." But he didn't explain. He simply gathered the clippings calmly, like someone storing away a heavy secret, and changed the subject. In that moment, something inside me broke. The perfect father, always present and loving, now had a shadow behind him. And it was in that silence, in that evasive response, that the first crack formed in the trust I had in him. After that night when my father looked away and said only, "One day I'll explain," something inside me changed. The trust I had always had in him began to blend with an unsettling curiosity. I needed to understand. I needed to find out who he had been before becoming the perfect father I knew. I spent weeks at the city library. Between dusty shelves and old computers, I dug through digital archives, scanned newspapers and public records. Every click felt like opening a door to a world my father had locked behind him. At first, I found only vague mentions, a name similar to his but written differently. It was as if he had used an alternate identity. I kept searching, and little by little, the fragments began to connect. I discovered that decades ago, he had been known by another name, a name that appeared in confidential reports and obscure articles. This man was not described as kind or loving. Quite the opposite. He was portrayed as cold, calculating, involved in clandestine operations during the 1980s. The reports spoke of secret missions in neighboring countries, of unexplained disappearances, of figures who emerged and vanished without leaving a trace. And in all of them, there was always one description that froze me to the core: a man with cold eyes and a calm smile. I didn't need more proof. That man was my father. The shock was devastating. The safe harbor of my childhood, the man who taught me how to ride a bike and invented magical stories in the backyard, now stood before me as someone dangerous, someone involved in secrets that could destroy the image I had of him. In that moment, I realized that the silence about the past wasn't just an irrelevant detail. It was a wall built to hide an entire life. And I, without meaning to, had begun to tear that wall down. I spent days gathering everything I had found: newspaper clippings, digital records, hurried notes scribbled in notebooks. Each piece of information seemed to form a dark mosaic of the life my father had hidden. I knew I couldn't keep it all to myself. I needed answers. On a quiet night, I sat at the dining table and spread the documents out in front of him. The sound of the paper hitting the wood echoed like a challenge. My heart was racing, but my voice came out steady. I know who you were. You can't hide it anymore. I need you to tell me the truth. My father looked at the papers, then at me. His eyes, usually full of calm, looked heavy, as if carrying decades of memories. He took a deep breath, placed his hands on the table, and said, "You're right. I can't run from this anymore. I was part of an organization, a dark organization that operated in the shadows, outside the law. I did things I'm not proud of, things that haunt me to this day." The words fell on me like stones. The man I had always admired, the one who seemed perfect, was admitting he had been involved in something dangerous, secret, almost unimaginable. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. The silence between us was suffocating. I could feel the weight of the revelation settling inside me, as if the image I had of my father were shattering right before my eyes. He continued, his voice breaking, "I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. I just want you to know that everything changed when you were born. I decided to be different. But the past never disappears." In that moment, I realized the truth wasn't just a hidden detail. It was an abyss between who he had been and who I believed he was. And for the first time, I didn't know if I would be able to cross that abyss. My father took a deep breath before he began. His eyes drifted for a few seconds, as if searching for courage in memories he wished he could forget. Then, in a quiet voice, he told me the story he had hidden his entire life. I grew up in a poor neighborhood, surrounded by violence. There were no opportunities, no future. Every street corner was marked by fights, every night interrupted by the sound of gunshots. I learned early that surviving meant being tougher than the world around me. He described a youth marked by hunger, fear, and the absence of choices. He said that, still a teenager, he was approached by men who offered money, power, and a way out of that miserable reality. They spoke of a greater cause, of fighting for something that would change the country. For a desperate young man, it felt like a chance at redemption. I was recruited by a secret organization. At first, I believed I was doing the right thing. They trained me, shaped me. I learned to be invisible, to obey without question. Missions were presented as acts of patriotism, but soon I realized there were darker interests behind them. My father spoke of clandestine operations in neighboring countries, of people who disappeared without leaving a trace, of orders that could not be disobeyed. He spoke with sorrow, like someone who carries invisible scars. I wanted to leave, but it wasn't that simple. Anyone who tried was marked. You became a target. So I stayed, trapped in a cycle of fear and obedience. Silence filled the room for a few seconds. I could feel the weight of every word. The man I knew as the perfect father had once been part of something dark, almost unimaginable. But then his voice changed. It grew softer, almost hopeful. Everything changed when I met your mother. She believed in me, even without knowing the whole truth. For the first time, someone looked at me as if I could be more than what I was. And when you were born, it was as if I'd been given a second chance. I decided I couldn't keep being that man. I needed to be different. I needed to be someone worthy of you. He looked me in the eyes, and I saw tears he was fighting to hold back. I can't erase what I did, but I can choose who I am now. And I chose to be your father. In that moment, I realized his story wasn't just about violence and secrets. It was also about transformation, about how someone marked by the past can find redemption through love and family. In the days that followed the revelation, I felt torn. On one side, there was the father I knew, loving, present, the man who held my hand during moments of fear and turned the backyard into a magical world. On the other side, there was the man he had confessed to once being, cold, calculating, part of a dark organization that operated in the shadows. It was as if two conflicting images overlapped inside me. I wanted to believe the perfect father still existed, but I couldn't ignore the shadow of the past now cast over his every gesture. When he smiled, I wondered, had that smile once been used to deceive someone? When he hugged me, I thought, had those arms once carried secrets too heavy to bear? I spent sleepless nights reflecting on perfection. Can someone truly be perfect? Or is perfection nothing more than an illusion we create so we don't have to see the flaws in those we love? My father showed me that humanity is made of contrasts. No one is only light or only shadow. He was living proof that a man can carry terrible mistakes and still choose to change. But the past does not disappear. It becomes a constant shadow, hanging over every choice, every word, every silence. And I knew that no matter how much my father tried to be different, that shadow would always be there, between us, reminding me that the perfection I believed I had lived was only part of the truth. That night began like any other. The quiet of the house was broken only by the distant sound of the television. But suddenly, someone knocked on the door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was firm, heavy, almost urgent. My father stood up slowly, as if he already knew who was on the other side. When he opened the door, I saw a man I had never seen before. Tall, with a face marked by time, and eyes that carried a strange mix of anger and respect. He didn't step inside. He just stood in the doorway, staring at my father. In a low voice, but loaded with threat, he said, "They know where you are." My heart raced. I didn't know who they were, but the impact of those words was immediate. My father's face turned pale. For a moment, he looked like the same man described in the newspaper clippings, cold, calculating, ready to confront something I couldn't even imagine. The stranger turned and disappeared into the darkness of the street without another word. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father closed the door slowly, rested his hands on the wood, and took a deep breath. Then he looked at me and said, "The past is catching up with me. I knew this day would come, but I won't let it touch you." In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes. He started organizing documents, making mysterious phone calls, placing objects in strategic spots around the house. It was as if he were preparing for an invisible war. I watched everything in silence, torn between fear and admiration. The perfect father I once knew now revealed himself as a man ready to face old enemies. And for the first time, I realized his story wasn't over. The past wasn't just a shadow, it was a real threat knocking at our door. In the days that followed the visit from the mysterious man, my father changed. He began organizing documents into discreet folders, hiding envelopes in strategic places around the house, and making phone calls that always ended in heavy silence. It was as if he were preparing to face something inevitable, an enemy I couldn't see. I watched every movement, feeling the tension build inside me. Part of me wanted to run, pretend none of it existed, return to the illusion of the perfect father. But another part knew I couldn't leave him. One night, while he was reviewing papers at the table, I approached him and said, "I'm staying. No matter what happens, I won't leave you alone." He looked up, surprised, and for an instant I saw in his eyes a mix of pride and sadness. This could be dangerous, but knowing you're with me gives me strength. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. I knew we were about to face something bigger than I could understand. But I also knew that, for the first time, we weren't just father and son. We were allies, standing against a past that refused to stay buried. That night, my father asked me to sit at the table. The documents were put away, and the silence weighed heavily in the air. He looked at me with determination, but also with a vulnerability I had never seen before. "I can't erase what I've done," he said, his voice trembling. "The past is engraved in me, and it always will be. But I can choose who I will be now, and I choose to be the man you need. I choose to be your father." His words echoed inside me. For so long I had chased perfection, believed he was immune to flaws. But in that moment, I realized that perfection doesn't exist. What exists is the ability to change, to search for redemption, to become better despite the scars. I looked at him and felt the weight of the revelation transform into something else, understanding. My father wasn't perfect. He never had been. But he was human. And by choosing to be different, by choosing love and family, he had found his redemption. In that moment, I understood that I didn't need a perfect father. I just needed a father who fought to be better every day. And that he already was. Today, when I think of my father, I no longer see him as the perfect man I believed in during childhood. I see someone human, marked by mistakes, scars, and difficult choices. A man who carried heavy shadows but chose not to be defined by them. He taught me, without needing to say it in words, that the value of a life isn't in the absence of flaws, but in the courage to change. That redemption is not erasing the past, but choosing every day to be better than you were yesterday. The legacy he left wasn't one of perfection, it was one of love. A love that resisted the shadows, that survived the threats, that remained firm even in the face of painful truth. And in the end, I realized I didn't need a perfect father. I needed a human one, someone capable of fighting his own demons to give me a different life. That was the greatest gift he could ever give me. This was the story of a father who seemed perfect, but who carried secrets powerful enough to change everything. In the end, it doesn't matter who someone once was, it matters who they choose to be now. And for that son, the imperfect father was still the greatest example of love. Did you enjoy this story? Leave a comment telling us where you're listening from, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode with 3 friends. See you in the next podcast.